Make way for Mr. Speaker.
I invite the Minister of Environment to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. This is a poem that I wrote in 2021 in response to the racism that my Indigenous brothers and sisters were experiencing in the healthcare system. We belong. We belong in neighborhoods. We belong in grocery stores. We belong in hospitals. We belong in medical clinics and laboratories and healing centers. We belong in workplaces. We belong in government spaces. We belong in schools and universities and colleges. We belong in banks. We belong in boardrooms. We belong in arts, theaters, and music. We belong in our own lands. We belong in our own waters. We belong everywhere and will no longer need to fight to be included. We will hold our heads high without shame or insecurity, but with dignity and grace as our ancestors taught us, because we belong.
Introductions by members. City White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, my daughter, Alexandra Helford, is not at school today. It's a sick day for her, but she is somehow watching question period today. So I want to wish Alexandra a speedy recovery, hopefully by the time I get back to my constituency, and I look forward to seeing her soon. So get well.
Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. April is Safe Digging Month in BC. And in the gallery today, we have members of the BC Common Ground Alliance. They are Dave Basbali, Cheryl Hogue, MJ Whitemarsh, Mike Roberts, Ron Enns, Donna Grant, Pat Miller, Warren Frey, Matt Pitcairn, Jimmy Yip, Todd Skaber, Tony Moliere, Randy Gatz, Ada Naddison, Don Schutten, Sam Anderson, and Hayden Earl. They're the host at today's luncheon later with all of the MLAs. I encourage you all to go, advocating that underground safety is everyone's responsibility. So on this day and this month, let's all remember to dig responsibly, Honourable Speaker. Call or click before you dig. Welcome to everyone here today.
Richmond Queensborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome Tasha Henderson to the BC Legislature. She's not in the gallery right now, but she's in the building as part of the UBCM delegation. Tasha is a New Westminster City Councillor as well as the Police Board Chair in New Westminster. Please make Tasha Henderson welcome. Thank you.
Minister of Labour.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. We are honoured to have some of the fiercest advocates for the province's children on the precinct today, meeting with government in their role as advocates. We have members of the BC Teachers Federation and QPBC who are with us in the gallery this morning. We have Clint Johnson, President BCTF, Carol Gordon, First Vice President. We have Michelle McNulty, Amy Reid, Anna Chudnovsky, Ravina Kang, Reagan Rankin, who are with the BCTF and who teach and provide incredibly important support for the province's children. And from CUPE, we are joined by Karen Ranalata, the President, Martina Boyd, Kirsten Daub, Amber Dolinsky, Debbie Kabesh, Paul Simpson, Jessica Wilkin, David Fleming, and Selena Lang. And I just want to say we had an opportunity to meet with them this morning, and we are so grateful for the incredible work that they do supporting the province's kids and advocating. Thank you so much, and would the House please join me in making them feel very welcome.
Member for Columbia River Revelstoke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a very, very special guest from my constituency just arriving shortly. Caroline LaChapelle is the Executive Director of the Revelstoke Chamber of Commerce, which is the third largest, fastest growing chamber in all of Canada. Caroline is a very selfless person who makes a lot of sacrifices for one of the best resort municipalities in the entire province. So when Caroline arrives, please make her feel welcome, and a round of applause now, please.
Minister of Indigenous Relations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to make two introductions in the House today. First, I'd like to introduce members from the Tahltan First Nation. Joining us in the gallery today are Tahltan Central Government President Beverly Slater, Iskut Band Council Chief Marie Kwok, and Tahltan Band Council Chief Rocky Jackson. My team had an incredible visit up in their beautiful territory last week. Warm welcomes from communities across Tahltan territory, and I'm honoured to be wearing a shawl from Tahltan and Tlingit artist Una Ann today. Will the House join me in welcoming Tahltan elected members today?
Leader of the third party.
Secondly, one more introduction, if you'll allow, on behalf of the Minister of Health. I'd like to ask the House to join me in welcoming Soto First Nation guests Chief Rudy Paquette, Councillor Colleen Todasak, Yurita Owens and Sarah House, as well as James Hickling. I've had the great pleasure of meeting with the Soto First Nation a couple times since being elected, and want to congratulate them on their steadfast leadership within their community. So will the House join me in making them feel welcome as well?
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am very happy to welcome back to this House former MLA for Saanich North and the Islands, Adam Olson. Adam has been a huge inspiration to me personally, and he's contributed immeasurably to British Columbia and continues to do so. Big footsteps to fill and broad shoulders to stand on. Will the House make Adam feel welcome?
Member for Surrey Newton.
Thank you, Speaker. I would like to give a warm welcome to my cousin Jason, who has joined us from Edmonton here in the House today. He was very helpful throughout my entire campaign, and I remember growing up and coming to this legislature and playing on the grass outside and outside the Edmonton legislature, and who knew we'd be inside the House one day sitting on this floor. So please join me in giving Jason a very warm welcome.
Member for Vernon-Lumbee.
Honorable Speaker, my cousin, who's like my younger sister, Prabdeep, just recently got married. We're so close, but unfortunately I wasn't able to go for her wedding because we're sitting in the session. And I've introduced her here before. Would the House please join me to extend our best wishes to Prabdeep and congratulate her and her husband. Thank you so much.
Member for Saanich North and Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to rise today to introduce a new member of our Green Caucus team, Ryan Hook. Ryan is taking on the role of press secretary with the caucus. His background in media includes time with Vice, with News Across Victoria, and with the Victoria Ska and Reggae Festival. He's been involved in social activism and outreach and joins my colleague, MLA Valeriot, as the second keen surfer in the caucus. Would the House please make him very welcome?
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Statements by members.
Member for Kelowna Mission.
Mr. Speaker, the Kelowna Nordic Ski and Snowshoe Club, founded in 1977, is a community-focused charity that provides members and day users an unforgettable outdoor experience. With 75 kilometers of groomed, wooded ski trails and 85 kilometers of snowshoe trails, the club attracts thousands of individuals each year to engage in a variety of activities. Whether you are a beginner or an expert, the club provides a healthy and affordable experience for enthusiasts of all ages and skill levels. The club is a vibrant, inclusive community for individuals and families from near and far looking to take in the incredible nature and panoramic views of the Okanagan Valley through winter sport. And it certainly does draw people from far and wide. At a recent event, for example, I ran into the head of the North Vancouver Chamber of Commerce, who regularly visits. The Kelowna Nordic Ski and Snowshoe Club is so much more than recreation. The club offers a wide range of programs designed to foster community, ensuring that every participant enjoys a fulfilling experience both on and off the trails. However, the club's two current grooming machines have logged more than 13,000 hours each, having groomed countless kilometers of trails for thousands of skiers and snowshoers over many, many decades. This is 3,000 hours past their life expectancy. I was pleased to attend their recent community fundraiser to support the purchase of a new grooming machine. Here I saw an incredible group of individuals and organizations banding together to support an organization which puts community at its helm, all for the love of winter sport. After being rejected last year, I truly hope to see their community gaming grant request approved so that current and future members of the club can continue to be involved in affordable, active living in an inclusive and vibrant community. Thank you.
Member for Vancouver-Langara.
Honorable Speaker, last Saturday I had the privilege of attending the opening celebrations of Sikh Heritage Month, celebrated in BC since 2018. Today I would like to share a poem, Being a Sikh, written by Surkhab. A person with a turban and long hair, that is how the world often sees us. But we are so much more than that. It's our values, our faith, and the teachings of Guru Granth Sahib Ji that make us shine bright. As Guru Nanak Dev Ji taught us through Vand Chako, we share what we have. We do not discriminate, for our Guru gave us the gift of langar. a place where we all sit together as equals, regardless of caste, creed, race, and gender. We know that the blood of all humans is red, and that alone is reason enough to treat everyone with equality and respect. We live by kirt karni, honest work, and naam japna, devotion to God. Gurbani runs through our veins. Our Guru made us strong. As Guru Gobind Singh Ji said, the one who suffers injustice is wrong, but the one who watches injustice and does nothing is worse. So we neither accept it, nor do we stand by and watch. Every time we say Vaheguru, we affirm that God is one. Our beautiful long hair is a symbol of our faith, covered by turbans that are not just pieces of cloth, but crowns that make us kings and queens. With that, Mr. Speaker, I extend my heartfelt congratulations to Sikhs across the world as we prepare to celebrate the birth of Khalsa on April 14. Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Shri Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh. Thank you.
Member for Langley Willowbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'd like to highlight an organization founded by Kim Snow. Kim's Angel is a dedicated nonprofit organization located in Langley, with a mission to uplift and support many individuals and families in our community who are struggling to keep things going. Each week we witness the challenges faced by our neighbors, and Kim wants to assure you that you're not alone. People care, and together we can create a magical impact, especially during the holiday season. Hundreds of hampers are put together, and a toy and food drive is held to help the famous Pink Ambulance. With the incredible support of the Langley community, Kim's Angel is committed to making a difference for those in need. While Kim recognizes that she cannot do everything, she firmly believes that we can do something meaningful. Kim's Angel's goal is to make life a little easier for our neighbors who are in need of a helping hand. The organization is made up of 70 dedicated individuals who aim to create a positive impact by providing essential support, including food, clothing, housing assistance, and basic necessities like furniture, baby items, school supplies, and hygiene products. Kim is grateful to partner with local businesses such as Farmers, IGA, Costco, Cobb's Bread, just to name a few, who share in our mission to help those in need. Every Wednesday morning, a line forms outside of Langley Vineyard Church. Kim and her wonderful angels gather to offer food, social services, mobile showers, fellowship, and unconditional support to those who are struggling to get by, no questions asked. Kim's Angels also provide dedicated support for groups including seniors facing financial challenges, young girls dealing with insecurities, and single mothers trying to build a better future for their families. Despite Kim's hope that their services would be needed less over the years, she continues to see record crowds lining up each Wednesday morning, reminding us of the ongoing needs within our community. It has been my honor for my family, including my 2 young daughters, to volunteer and give back to Kim's Angels. Together, we show the compassion and community spirit truly makes a difference in the lives of those around us. Thank you.
Member for Coquitlam, Millardville.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise today to discuss a difficult topic, one we often avoid, and that is death, and to bring attention to the work of a nonprofit organization that helps British Columbians prepare in dignity, the Memorial Society of BC. One of the most vulnerable, difficult, dark times in our lives is the death of a loved one. So often the ones left behind are desperately trying to keep their heads above the waters of grief, and it is very challenging to know just what to do. People want to honor their friend or their family member in the right way, and it's hard to navigate all of the decisions and the choices available. And for people who want to responsibly plan for the end of their own life, they want to know that they're also doing the best thing to make sure their wishes are represented and they're reducing the burden and the costs on their children and grandchildren. And we all know that funeral arrangements can be very expensive. But the Memorial Society of BC has been there to support British Columbians since 1956, over 70 years, to help guide people through their planning, support grieving families to find affordable burial or cremation options, and to educate the public to improve the quality and the accessibility of their end-of-life services. Through a one-time payment of $50 for lifetime membership, the Memorial Society will make referrals to funeral providers who can provide burial or cremation at a much, much lower cost. Their funeral home partners are locally owned facilities operated by families here in British Columbia. They will compassionately assist and support the planning for end-of-life arrangements, offering private and secure record keeping and membership platforms to store confidential information, and they provide education. They are reaching out to ensure that this information can get to those who need it. The Memorial Society of BC cooperated with the Garden of Compassion Society, run by the wonderful Sophia Bay, and ensured that this information was translated to Korean-speaking seniors. With this information, those seniors now have the option to join the hundreds of thousands of British Columbians who also participate. Discussing end-of-life planning is never easy, but the Memorial Society is there to help protect their members in life and beyond and ease that final journey. I thank their volunteers and their staff for the essential service they have provided to so many for so long. Thank you.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise to mark World Water Day that took place during our break on March 22nd. Far too often we overlook the importance of water. Canada has 1/5 of the world's fresh water, and it can be easy to take water for granted here in BC, at least 9 months of the year. Yet the fragility of our water systems is clearer than ever. The climate crisis is a water crisis. Droughts and extreme weather events related to climate change can damage critical water infrastructure, introduce pollutants into reservoirs, and place immense pressure on watersheds. The threats to our water have been exacerbated by the potential for conflict over BC's water resources. The need for water is playing out on the international stage like it's a stock to be traded, and we must take this very seriously. Tom Rutherford of the Cowichan Water Board presents another perspective. Quote, I think we can learn from the Cowichan tribes who have lived here for thousands of years. They don't look at water as a resource, they look at it as a member of the family. Mr. Speaker, thankfully, with strong watershed governance based on agreed principles and local knowledge, we can move from conflict and instability to collaborative solutions and proactive management. Resilient watersheds create healthy communities, and BC has the opportunity and responsibility to become a global leader in watershed governance, investing in local control to ensure communities, ecosystems, farmers, and industry can all prosper. Mr. Speaker, there are so many things we can do to better protect our most precious resource, and we can do it together. Our future depends on it. Thank you.
Member for Cowichan Valley.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. The Cowichan Estuary contains habitat that are critically important for the wild Pacific salmon, migratory and breeding birds, as well as species at risk. In fact, up to 230 birds species call the Cowichan Estuary home. Estuaries are among the most productive ecosystems on Earth, and they require a natural balance of fresh water, salt water to thrive. But the climate crisis and human involvement are threatening natural estuary processes, putting the vital habitat and surrounding communities at risk. This past week, I had the opportunity to join my colleague, Minister of Water, Lands and Resource Stewardship, along with local government representatives and members of Cowichan tribes to discuss the Cowichan Weir and the Cowichan Estuary Restoration projects. With funding committed from the federal and provincial governments, the Cowichan Estuary project is the largest estuary restoration project to ever occur on Vancouver Island. The project will restore 70 hectares of marsh habitat and reestablish natural estuarine processes by removing human-made barriers to the marsh, development and reconnecting freshwater channels to tidal-influenced areas. This project also places significant emphasis on incorporating Indigenous food systems so that these lands continue to be farmed, providing cultural significant foods and medicine plants to the Cowichan tribes, while contributing to the overall food security of our region. The Cowichan Estuary Restoration Project is being led by a collective of many hands. I also have to add here, because I only have 2 minutes, what I've been hearing in my community's racial comments about this project, which is causing division instead of inclusion, of belonging. With everyone paddling together, this project will serve as a shining example of how many stronger we can be as we all can work together. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members.
Member for Kamloops Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday British Columbians realized yet again that this Premier certainly does not run his government anywhere close to the way that former Premier Horgan ran government in British Columbia. We have gone from surplus and stable credit ratings under Premier Horgan to record deficits and 4 credit downgrades, all under the watch of this Premier. This, in spite of the fact that there is record revenues coming to government on the backs of British Columbia taxpayers. A simple question to the Premier: how high is an acceptable deficit for this government to tolerate?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Reducing our deficit and getting on a path to balance is a singular focus for the Ministry of Finance. The Premier is so appraised of this and guiding us on our work. Every single minister in our government, in their mandate letters, were instructed to work with the Minister of Finance to find reductions. At the same time, we're deeply focused on growing our economy. It's so important that we get back on a road to balance, but I want to point out to the member opposite, there is more than one kind of deficit, Honourable Speaker, and we inherited an incredible deficit in services and in infrastructure, and we've been addressing that for British Columbians and will continue to do so.
Kamloops Centre supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, this Premier inherited a $6 billion surplus. We are 2 days into the fiscal year when the 2 credit rating agencies, S&P and Moody's, downgraded for a 4th time under this Premier's watch BC's credit rating. And in fact, Moody's had this to say on day 2 of the fiscal plan. The deficit, they project, will no longer be $10.9 billion. It'll be $14.3 billion. That is on day 2. Day 2 of the fiscal year. So, Mr. Speaker, how much longer can British Columbians afford to wait for this government, this Premier, to actually action any cuts and get their fiscal house in order instead of watching the deficit grow out of control?
Minister.
Honourable Speaker, the member opposite can make up numbers all he wants. The reality is this work is underway. This work is underway, and it will have results, Honourable Speaker. I also want to point out that S&P highlights that federal immigration policies and heightened trade uncertainty will create challenges for our economic growth. We are at a moment of time of incredible economic uncertainty, and it's having an impact, Honourable Speaker. It's having an impact across all of Canada, across the world. Many places will experience downgrades. That's the reality of global uncertainty, Honourable Speaker. We're not alone in this.
Members,
we're not alone
please.
in this.
Members.
And despite the downgrades yesterday, we remain the leader in Canada with the highest ratings, Honourable Speaker, in Canada.
Member for Kelowna Mission.
Mr. Speaker, this Premier inherited a $6 billion surplus from his predecessor, John Horgan. With yesterday's second credit downgrade, Moody's predicted the deficit would increase from $10.9 billion to $14.3 billion. This Premier has run up a record-breaking deficit that continues to grow seemingly daily and continues to leave our children and grandchildren paying for his economic mismanagement. For those of us who don't understand NDP economics, can the Premier please explain the $20 billion swing in the province's fiscal position?
Minister.
Honourable Speaker, there has been a worldwide economic crisis, and we had a decision to make whether we continue to support British Columbians while they struggle with affordability or whether we step back and make cuts across the board. We know what the other side would do. They would balance things on the backs of people. The approach...
Member, come to order. Members.
Wow, that was so funny.
Members.
So funny.
Sorry, Cloverdale. Minister.
We know what the work is ahead of us. We are going to protect core services for British Columbians, things like education. I remember what it was like in the early 2000s when the Leader of the Opposition was part of the unbelievable cuts that they made, how that cost people. I remember having to take my kids to work with me for weeks on end because of the strikes from what you did in education. We are making different decisions on this side of the House. We are making different decisions on this side of the House, Honourable Speaker. We will continue to protect services for people, core things like healthcare and education and social services, and will grow the economy at the same time.
Members, ask the question and let the Minister answer the question also, please. Member for Kelowna Mission Supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister said yesterday that the government knew credit downgrades were coming, saying, quote, they were a strong likelihood. So let me get this straight. This government publicly presented a misleading budget while privately anticipating axing the carbon tax and getting hit with credit downgrades and increased borrowing costs. Can this Finance Minister please help me understand how this is not a return to the fudget budget of the 90s?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. This budget was focused on ensuring that we're protecting core services for people while we begin the important work to get back on that path to balance. That is work that we're doing right now, Honourable Speaker. There's very early indications in our budget and much more work to come in Budget 26 and beyond. The indications in our current budget...
Members, calm down. Members, take it easy. Minister.
In the current budget, we see $1.5 billion in savings that we plan to do through economic efficiencies. I expect those numbers to grow.
Okay. Yeah. Do you need to speak?
Members.
Honourable Speaker, this is deeply important work, but it's also really important that we grow the economy at the same time, and we are. I can point out so many different sectors that we're having success in. Let me start by our life sciences sector, Honourable Speaker. Just yesterday, Chinook Therapies got approval for their breakthrough technology, yet another technology developed right here in British Columbia in conjunction with the work that we're doing in our life sciences plan, Honourable Speaker. Another example.
House Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Just 2 years after being introduced, this government has cancelled the secondary suite incentive program, eliminating potential rental stock across the province. This government blames uncertain financial times for this decision, but it is precisely because of these uncertain financial times that British Columbians need access to more affordable housing options, especially as rent continues to rise across the province. British Columbians deserve immediate action from this government to deal with the housing crisis. Through you, Honourable Speaker, to the Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs, what is your plan to make up for the affordable rental supply that you assured us this program would deliver?
Minister of Housing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. The member is very well aware that we have been leading the country in trying to address the housing crisis. In fact, jurisdictions around the country, the federal government, in fact, also is replicating some of the strategies that we put in place. We are leading when it comes to per capita housing starts. That is a positive, because if you address the supply in the market, you address the challenges that people are facing. I would correct the member in that rents are coming down for the first time after a long time across the province. In almost every single community, in fact, British Columbia has seen some of the largest declines in rents from any jurisdiction in Canada. It's because we're making significant investments in new affordable housing. We're making significant reductions in red tape so that local governments are able to make decisions to approve housing quicker, Honourable Speaker. And we're partnering with our private sector to bring on new housing through BC Build and a whole host of other programs. That work will continue. I look forward to continue to work with the member if they have additional ideas on how we can move in a positive direction. But I'm proud of the direction that we're heading, but we know there's a lot more work to do.
Member supplemental.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. The cancellation of the secondary suite incentive program will hit BC rural communities the hardest, where accessory dwelling units and suites are key in meeting their growing housing needs. My constituents created a rural housing program designed specifically around the secondary suite incentive program, which dozens have already applied to, only for this government to pull the rug from under them, and countless other rural communities across BC. Through you, Honourable Speaker, to the Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs, how much of the funding left over from the secondary suite incentive program will be used to support housing in BC's rural communities?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Every dollar that we have will go back towards supporting other initiatives within housing. The member knows that through our BC Builds program, we're partnering with both rural communities as well as large communities to build affordable rentals so that we can get an increased supply and attract the important workforce that we know we need in every single community. I will add that the federal government has announced that they're rolling out their secondary suite program, modeled exactly off of ours, but the one difference is they're offering double the amount of dollars. And I think it's important in these times to make sure that we're making sure there's efficiency and alignment with our programs. We believe that there's no point in having a program if the federal government's going to create that program. So we're using those dollars to put it into BC Builds so we can increase supply in a different format. We're going to continue that work. Look forward to meeting with the member to discuss further actions in the very near future.
Member for Vancouver, Colchina.
Mr. Speaker, I have publicly stated that the number of confirmed burials at the former residential school in Kamloops is 0. This is the truth. A fact that the Kamloops Band itself also admits, and a fact that the Chief Justice of British Columbia has also confirmed in the case of Regina and Dirk last year. As a lawyer and an arbitrator for over 30 years, I have relied on facts my whole professional life. However, the First Nations Leadership Council, one of the most powerful lobby groups in British Columbia, is now calling for me to be imprisoned on the basis of that factual statement. Imprisoned.
Question, member.
Mr. Speaker, will the Premier defund the First Nations Leadership Council and denounce every group that is advocating to criminalize the true statements of Canadian citizens?
Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I have to say, I think on behalf of most members in this House that I very much regret that that's a question that member. Just the other day, we screened the movie Sugarcane, and we got to see a little bit of the history of what residential school survivors have faced in this province, in this country.
We got to see the pain, but most of all, what we got to see was their search for the truth. For us, with a very simple request to us, support them, help them, tell their stories and uncover the truth of what happened at residential school. And we all need to do that, Mr. Speaker. This member has been speaking very vocally in a very damaging way to survivors, and I want to speak directly to survivors right now. We believe you. We are there for you. We will support you in understanding what happened and being there to make sure we all understand the truth of what happened at residential school. Mr. Speaker, I was a lawyer for many years on the front lines with survivors and their claims going forward, and I saw how hard it was for them to get their stories believed and heard through the justice system. This member has repeatedly called upon us to deny the course that the Law Society is teaching lawyers. That is an important thing for us to uphold in this House. I know that the members across the way and a lot of us in this House support me in condemning that question and standing by survivors, and I hope we would all stand to do that.
Member has supplemental.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I can go toe-to-toe with any lawyer. I did work with Aboriginal children for 7 years as a young offender defense attorney, perhaps even spent more time doing that work than any of you. Mr. Speaker, my questions are not about feelings, they are about facts. Does the Premier have a list of facts that British Columbians must not speak lest they be put in jail? Or should I request that list from his good friends at the First Nations Leadership Council?
Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I won't repeat what I said, but I will say I would hope that that member would use their power and privilege of sitting in this House to support survivors and help find the truth instead of what's happening right now.
Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fraser Health has been in chaos. 18-hour wait times at Surrey Memorial, pediatrics getting treated in portables. We get a press release saying the former CEO of Fraser Health has mutually left that position. We know that's not true. We also know from sources that Victoria Lee was paid an exorbitant severance package. My question to the Minister of Health is a direct one. What is the number that Victoria Lee was paid in her severance package? Can the Minister give that today?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Thank you to the member for the question. My focus as the Health Minister is first and foremost in ensuring that the people of British Columbia get the healthcare services that they need and deserve. I know the member understands that severance will be determined between Dr. Lee and Fraser Health as per labour standards and her contract. Mr. Speaker, that severance will be disclosed, and they all are during normal financial disclosure processes. What I'm looking forward to is working with the new CEO, the board, in strengthening healthcare for people in the Fraser Health region, in continuing to take action, like strengthening healthcare at Surrey Memorial, adding a cardiac cath lab, hiring new doctors, hiring new healthcare workers there, establishing a new medical school in the Fraser Health region, the first in Western Canada in over 50 years, Honourable Speaker, and building a new hospital in Surrey. That's a new emergency room and a new BC campus.
Surrey White Rock supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I never thought I'd be having to play the Price is Right with the Minister of Health, but here we are today. The fact is that Fraser Health has been in utter chaos. And the Health Minister, again, time and time, has refused to say why Victoria Lee was removed from her position. So my question to the Minister is a direct one. Did Victoria Lee's severance exceed over $1 million? Yes or no?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I don't know how I could possibly be more clear. Severance is determined between Dr. Lee and Fraser Health, and it will be disclosed as per normal disclosure standards. Those are the facts, Honourable Speaker. But you know, it's just so disappointing to see that the opposition wants to distract us from the excellent work that is taking place in the Fraser Health region. Mr. Speaker, it's no wonder they want to distract us from their own track record. For example, Mr. Speaker.
Members, come toward. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when the Leader of the Opposition was in government, he rejected a new medical school. Mr. Speaker, they sold the land, which already could have a second hospital built on it, but it isn't because they sold that land. Mr. Speaker, we're planning for the future. We're hiring the healthcare workers that are needed. We're working with the board and the CEO to do this. We're going to continue to do this because we know that people living south of the Fraser deserve healthcare like everybody else in British Columbia does, when they need it, where they need it. Thank you.
Members for Courtenay-Comox.
Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the Minister of Health announced yet another superficial shakeup of the Provincial Health Services Authority. Under this government, healthcare has collapsed. Nurses are overwhelmed, and British Columbians are struggling to get basic health services. In a clear case of hiring the arsonist as the fire chief, Penny Ballin, the same failed consultant who designed this broken system, is now being paid $400,000 to fix it. On top of the $1.4 million she has pocketed over the last 4 years as the special health advisor to the Premier. To the Minister of Health, what confidence should British Columbians have that the person who lit the match is now ready to put out the fire?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. We announced on Monday the first of the reviews that will be taking place in the health authorities, and we're focusing on the Provincial Health Services Authority because of the way it touches British Columbians in communities large and small with the services that it delivers. This is about looking at administrative structures and ensuring that every dollar that goes into the PHSA is being maximized. We're getting the best value for money in delivering healthcare services on the front line to British Columbians. That work is being led by Dr. Ballum, who, as I have stated in the House before, has a long track record of service in healthcare, a long track record of working in the private sector, the public sector, and delivering, for example, the vaccination rollout program during the pandemic. Now, the member is citing numbers, but what the member is not adding is that some of that contract was to a limited company that employs other people too. That Dr. Ballum, like other healthcare professionals and executives, are paid salaries that are congruent with across the sector in that role. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud that Dr. Ballum is going to help us lead this review, but what I am most looking forward to is seeing the results of that review. I'll be getting the first report in 6 weeks' time. We'll be taking action to ensure that every dollar is maximized and used on the front line, delivering healthcare for British Columbians.
Member for Abbotsford Mission.
Mr. Speaker, let's do some real math. At a time when the Premier couldn't find money to fulfill his campaign promise of $1,000 of a grocery rebate for British Columbians, he found enough money to pay a failed consultant, Penny Ballum, $1,000 a day. Through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, why are we prioritizing friends and insiders instead of everyday British Columbians?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. We are prioritizing strengthening our universal public health care system and ensuring that British Columbians get the health care that they deserve. We're doing that by adding doctors and nurses into our system, by pouring more investments into infrastructure than ever before. Mr. Speaker, work that was not done in previous years. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue this work. We know there's a lot to do, but let's not forget the people who are actually delivering that health care. What they want to hear from this House, what they need to hear from every side of this House is that we have their backs, that we are behind them, that we are supporting them. Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what we're going to continue to do.
Member for Surrey North.
Thank you, Speaker. Surrey's urban mission puts food on people's table. They are going to shut down because no funding. Will the Premier do right thing and fund Surrey urban mission?
Minister of Housing.
Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. We have been providing Surrey Urban Mission since the pandemic $1.9 million to operate their shelter. We have notified them. We are going to continue that funding. It's important for members to note that we provide Surrey Urban Mission $6.3 million to provide supports and services in Surrey. It's important services. We're going to continue to support them, Honourable Speaker, but it's also important that we continue to expand the supports available in Surrey. We've been meeting with local community organizations. We've been meeting with the council to identify other locations where we can continue to expand to support vulnerable people. Surrey Urban Mission is going to continue to get their $1.9 million, and we're going to continue to work with them into the future.
Columbia River Revelstoke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What have we learned in the House today? Yesterday, BC was hit with 2 more credit rating downgrades. That's 5 in total under this government. That's the market's verdict on this Premier's reckless fiscal management. While families are $200 away from being able to pay their bills every month, this government is dishing out high 6-figure severance packages like candy to failed staffers and political insiders. Will the Premier admit his affordability plan has failed and finally put people before payouts?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Thanks to the member opposite for the question. We continue to focus on affordability for people, Honourable Speaker, in many, many different ways. And that's why you see in this budget us protecting core services. The decision to step back from the rebate was one based on the threat of tariffs, which has come to fruition in the uncertainty we're seeing in the market, on the uncertainty that we're seeing in the economy, and the decisions that people are making right now because of it. This is a time we have to spend carefully. Our affordability measures remain in place. Things like ensuring our family benefit, the incredible work that we're doing on childcare, and so importantly, such a big chunk of people's spending every month is their rent. And Mr. Speaker, because of the work that we're doing, those rents are starting to come down 5.7%, Honourable Speaker. This is important work and will continue.
Member for Abbotsford South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the Finance Minister talks about uncertainty. Well, let's talk about some certainty. You know what's certain? Is if you have a job with this government and you get fired, you're going to get a big payout. That's certain. Penny Ballum, sadly, tragically, isn't the only person getting a golden handshake from this Premier. His former Chief of Staff, Matt Smith, got $279,000 as a severance package. Amber Hawking walked away with a whopping 6-figure severance package. Jeff Meggs received a $300,000 golden parachute. Victoria Lee, failed Fraser Health CEO, allegedly received over $1 million severance package. But the topper, Mr. Speaker, the topper is Lori Wanamaker got $591,000, and then the Premier rewarded that incompetence by appointing her to a board on BC Hydro. So my question, Mr. Speaker, why is it that only former staff are seeing any big benefits from this government, while half of British Columbians are $200 away from not paying their bills.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. One thing that we know for certain about the opposition.
You get a reward if you get fired by this government.
Member, you have already had asked a question.
They never miss an opportunity to savage the reputation of hardworking, qualified individuals who have spent a career working in the public service in the province of British Columbia, Honourable Speaker. That is shameful. Laurie Wanamaker, Honourable Speaker. Laurie Wanamaker started a career under social credit, served under the NDP, served under the BC Liberals, rose through the ranks to become a respected deputy minister in governments of every political stripe, Honourable Speaker. Yet an opposition that is devoid of any sense of what's right and responsible wants to savage a reputation. The one thing we can count on the opposition, Honourable Speaker, thing we can count on the opposition, Honourable Speaker, is not to stand up for British Columbians, not to stand up for Canadians, but to stand up for their own interests, to make statements such as what we've seen where let's become a protectorate of the United States. Oh, they don't like it, Honourable Speaker. It's painful, I know. But it's a fact. When they could condemn the Trumps, a bunch of them go and vote no, Honourable Speaker. The reality is this. This side of the House respects the public service that does the work, whether they are in the healthcare system, the transportation system, our law enforcement system. They're the public servants, the deputy ministers, the assistant deputy ministers, the executive directors, Honourable Speaker, because they're doing work on behalf of British Columbians, and it's a shame they don't recognize it.
The bell ends the question period. Madam Clerk. Sorry. A member for Saanich Northern Islands.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to raise a point of order on the question from the member from Vancouver Kilchina, and that her remarks were offensive and provocative and contradicting Standing Order 42.
Thank you, Member. Madam Clerk. Members, the question asked by Vancouver Kilchina was heard by the chair, and we had a debate here, so the chair will not intervene in that debate that already had taken place in the House. Madam Clerk.
Orders of the day.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. In this chamber, I call continued second reading debate on Bill 7. In the Douglas House chamber, Section A, I call continued debate on the estimates for the Ministry of Citizen Services.
Good morning, members. We'll call this chamber back to order, where we will hear continued debate on Bill 7, and the chair will recognize the member from Langley Abbotsford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before you begin, we'll just ask everybody to take their conversations into the hallway, please, so we can carry on with the business of the day. Thank you, Langley Abbotsford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll carry on where I left off yesterday, a troubling pattern of governance. Yet time and time again, we see a pattern of dismissive governance. The public was not properly consulted before Bill 7 was tabled. Industry leaders, small business owners, and trade experts have raised concerns, but their voices were ignored in the drafting process by this government. It is only after backlash and public scrutiny that this government makes half-hearted attempts at course correction. That is not leadership. That is damage control. This government claims to support economic growth, yet it consistently undermines the very principles that foster investment and stability. Trade policy should be developed with the input of those who will be most affected: businesses, workers, communities. Instead, what we see is a government that believes it knows best and is unwilling to listen to the people it was elected to serve. The issue with Bill 7 is not simply about one clause or another. It's about a fundamental shift in how policy is created and implemented in this province. If this government is willing to attempt such a blatant power grab in one area, what is stopping from them for doing it again in another? The erosion of democratic accountability does not happen at all at once. It happens step by step. In moments like this, when legislation is introduced with little notice and inadequate debate, we must ask ourselves, what does this mean for future policy decisions? Will trade agreements be negotiated in secret without legislative oversight? Will new economic frameworks be introduced through cabinet orders rather than parliamentary debate? Will discussions that impact thousands of businesses and workers be made without their input? If we allow this government to continue on this trajectory, the answer to these questions may well be yes. It is not enough for the government to claim that it is acting with the public interest. Transparency is not an inconvenience. It is a necessity in a functioning democracy. When the government moves to consolidate power at the expense of transparency, it is the public that pays the ultimate price. We have seen this before with the NDP government. They introduced policies that centralize control, limit debate, and restrict the ability of British Columbians to have a say in the decisions that affect them. They tell us to trust them while removing the very mechanisms that allow for accountability. This is not government. This is rule by decree. British Columbians deserve better. They deserve a government that respects democratic institutions, listens to stakeholders, and engages in genuine consultation. Bill 7, even without Part 4, represents a dangerous precedent. It reflects a government that sees public input as an obstacle rather than an essential part of legislative process. We in opposition will not stand by while this government continues down this path. We will continue to fight for accountability, for proper debate, for policies that truly serve the interests of British Columbians. The people of this province deserve a government that operates in the open, not behind closed doors. And we will hold them to that standard. Mr. Speaker, the people of British Columbia are watching. They have seen this government, how it operates, and they are growing increasingly frustrated. Let this be a message to this government. The people will not accept backroom deals and unilateral decisions. They demand better. Bill 7 in its current form remains deeply flawed. We will not stop fighting for the accountability that this government so readily tries to avoid. Now I want to cover the costs, tolls, and infrastructure fees, Mr. Speaker. Another deeply concerning aspect of Bill 7 is the introduction of new tolls, fees, charges, and other use of provincial infrastructure, specifically targeting American companies transporting goods throughout British Columbia. While this may seem like an a sound-like measure to generate revenue from foreign commercial traffic, the reality is it's far more complex and troubling. We have seen this time and time again how new government fees and tolling systems, once implemented, rarely remain limited in scope. Today, the target is American carriers. But what assurance do British Columbians have that they won't be the next? The infrastructure required to track and bill foreign trucking companies does not appear overnight. It will require significant investment in new technology, automated tracking, and administrative oversight. Once the system is in place, what is stopping the government from expanding it to include local businesses, independent truckers, and even everyday commuters? And let's talk about implementation. The government has not provided details on whether traditional toll booths will be used. If not, or what does that mean? We will see province-wide expansion of license plate tracking systems, automated billing systems, and surveillance of road users. How much will this cost to establish and maintain such a system? And crucially, what happens to this infrastructure once the so-called trade war ends? Does this government plan to dismantle it? Or will it simply repurpose it to collect revenue from British Columbians? Furthermore, this policy raises serious concerns about its border economic impact. Will it trigger retaliatory measures from the United States impacting our own trucking industry and exporters? What will be the effect on industries that rely on cross-border trade, such as agriculture, forestry, and manufacturing? Mr. Speaker, this government has a duty to be transparent. They must explain how this policy will work. Who will it ultimately affect? And whether it is merely the first step towards a broader tolling system that will hit British Columbians. That wasn't from our party, member. Something that you really like to talk about. I wouldn't be in this House if I was sitting on the BCU side. This is the Conservative Party of BC, member.
Members, the member from Langley Abbotsford has the floor. Please carry on.
Let's talk about this here. We got the member right there, the forestry minister. The last 8 years under this government, forestry has been decimated. Lumber mills have been shut down.
Members, perhaps we could get back to Bill 7. The chair is terribly interested in hearing about Bill 7, and I'm sure the folks joining us in the gallery are as well.
Mr. Speaker, these so-called fees, whether described as tolls, levies, or infrastructure charges, are nothing more than a hidden tax waiting to be expanded. They undermine affordability and places additional financial burdens on businesses and families alike. British Columbians deserve a government that prioritizes their financial well-being, not one that introduces new revenue tools under the guise of trade policy. We will continue to oppose Bill 7 and fight against any attempt to lay groundwork for a broader tolling system that one day could impact all users of this province. Beyond the direct cost to individuals, Mr. Speaker, we must consider the border economic impact of this bill. Small businesses rely on free flow of goods and services, and any disruption, whether through new fees, regulatory uncertainty, or bureaucratic overreach, could all have dire consequences. These businesses are the backbone of our economy, employing thousands of British Columbians. And any additional financial or bureaucratic burden risks stifling their growth at a time when affordability is already a pressing concern. British Columbia has always prided itself in being a hub of trade, a gateway to the Pacific, and province that fosters economic opportunity. But if this government, using this trade war as justification, continues to go down this path of heavy-handed intervention, of imposing unnecessary costs and creating uncertainty, we risk undermining the very foundation of our economy. Entrepreneurs need stability, not sudden shifts in policy that leave them scrambling to adjust. When a government makes it harder to do business, it is working against the very prosperity it claims to support. Consider our construction sector, which has already suffered under this government's delays and regulatory roadblocks. Bill 7 threatens to add another layer of complexity, making it harder for businesses to plan, invest, and grow. We are already facing a housing crisis, with British Columbians struggling to afford homes. And this government should be reducing barriers, not erecting new ones. The last thing our province needs is more red tape, and yet that is exactly what this government continues to oppose time and time after again, suffocating industries that are critical to our economic growth. A call for accountability, Mr. Speaker. The people of British Columbia deserve a government that listens to them, that consults them, and that respects the democratic process that has built this amazing nation. They deserve a government that does not sneak through undemocratic provisions only to backtrack when they get caught, while still preserving the essence of those provisions elsewhere in the bill. This is not a responsible government should operate. A government that respects its citizens does not seek to undermine democratic safeguards through legislative loopholes. It does not attempt to push through controversial policies in a manner that avoids scrutiny. Instead, it engages in policies in a manner that avoids scrutiny. Instead, it engages in dialogue and values the input of people it serves, and ensures that every major decision is a subject to proper debate and accountability. The Conservative Party of BC stands firmly against this approach. We believe in transparency and responsible governance, in ensuring that major policy changes are made with full participation of the public and their elected representatives. And not just when they get caught. A government should work for the people, not against them. Yet, time and time again, we see this from the NDP government. Impose policies without proper consultation, disregarding concerns raised by stakeholders, local governments, and industry leaders. Mr. Speaker, British Columbians are already facing immense challenges. The cost of living is skyrocketing, businesses are struggling under excessive regulation, and families are being burdened by taxes and fees. Instead of addressing these pressing concerns, the government continues to prioritize its own agenda over the well-being of the people it claims to represent. We will not stand by while this government continues to erode the trust, centralize power, and impose unnecessary financial burdens on hard-working British Columbians. On this side of the aisle, we will continue to stand for fairness, accountability, and fundamental principles of democracy. Mr. Speaker, Bill 7 is more than just a piece of legislation. It is a reflection of this government's approach to governance. It reveals a willingness to undermine democratic norms, to impose financial burdens on citizens without proper justification, and to create mechanisms that could fundamentally alter the way this province operates without public scrutiny. We owe it to the people of British Columbia to demand better. We owe it to them to reject this bill in its current form and to insist on a government that governs with transparency and accountability and respect for the democratic process. That is what I had written, but I do have some more comments here, Mr. Speaker. You know, when I got into politics, I came in here to listen to all sides and do what's best for the province of British Columbia and the people of this province. And what I see from the other side is consistent belittling of people who were elected by British Columbians, who were elected. And now, every single time that we get belittled, degraded, and brought down, and what do is cheer over there. Once again, we have the Minister of Energy cheering again. This is shameful, the way that we act in here. We need to represent British Columbians and put their interests first. This bill has nothing in it that will help British Columbians in their lives, especially in this time in British Columbia. You know, I see you laughing over there.
Member, let's focus on Bill 7, please. We're trying to be respectful on both sides of the aisle today. Let's focus on Bill 7. That is what the
Bill
chair
7.
wants to hear about.
Okay. That'll be it.
Thank you, member. Seeing no. Ladysmith, Oceanside.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I just feel compelled to rise and speak a little bit in response to some of the information that I've heard from the members opposite on Bill 7. You know, all over the province, people are asking us to respond to what we're seeing down south, the unjustified threats to Canada's economy, to BC's economy, and what it's going to do to the small businesses, but also the larger businesses that are the backbone of BC's economy. And I'm flabbergasted that for 2 days we've been listening to the members opposite oppose this bill when it is the #1 issue that we are hearing when we are on the doorsteps, when we are in communities. I just came back from 2 weeks in my community, and I didn't have a day where I didn't talk about this with people in my community, where I didn't hear from people in my community about the fears that they are feeling regarding this issue. And as a government, it's incumbent upon us to act, to protect our economy, to diversify our economy, to react to what our constituents are telling us. Part 1 of this bill is about removing interprovincial trade barriers. And our Premier has been leading the country on this work. This will allow BC to diversify its economy, to diversify its trading partners, to strengthen our economy, to find new trading partners and new markets for our goods, which will lead to strengthening our economy. I just can't fathom why the members opposite are opposed to this. I just heard from the members speaking about how they will continue to oppose Bill 7. How could you be opposed to strengthening our economy, to diversifying our trading partners during a time of global trade threats? It's shocking. I listened to them during question period, day after day after day, talk about the importance of strengthening our economy. And that's exactly what Bill 7 does. It allows us to respond in a time that is truly unprecedented. And that word, boy, is it getting tiring to use. Unprecedented pandemics, unprecedented weather-related events, unprecedented threats, unprecedented fire events. This is what this government has had to govern through. And we stand up for BC every single time. And we have put BC first every single time. And we will continue to put BC first. And that's what Bill 7 does. And the fact that we are spending so much time in debate about this when we could have moved it through this a little bit quicker, you know, now here we are on second day of debate, when people are asking us to respond quickly. And we finally have some answers, a little bit of clarity, but not really clarity, because the president down south has shown that he is not trustworthy and that he will change his mind whenever he feels like it. And then he'll govern by tweeting in the middle of the night and send everyone into a panic. And what this does, what this bill does, all 3 parts of the bill does, is allow us to respond now. It puts the pathway forward, and it gives us the direction that people are asking us to have. It allows us to finally respond, and it is time for us to start to move through this and start passing this bill. I am confused about why folks would not want to grow and diversify
our economy. And all I can think of is that perhaps this is the close relationship that some of the members opposite may have with the mega folks down south who are looking at, you know, building a wall around their own economy and wanting to shrink their own economy and just actually hang out with each other. But this bill is the opposite of that. It allows us to diversify and strengthen our economy. And part 2 is about procurement. And it allows the government to focus and prioritize buying BC. And I can't fathom why anyone would want to oppose that. Everyone in BC right now is buying BC. Why would the government not want to follow suit and not be able to follow suit? Why would anyone oppose the government being able to prioritize BC businesses and BC products during this particular moment in time? And that's what this bill does. And I have listened for the last 2 days to the members talking about Part 4 of the bill, which we have actually removed. And we announced that we were going to remove that last week. And yet they've wasted all of our time talking about the possibilities of Part 4 when it has been removed and amended. So I felt compelled, based on the things that I've heard spoken in the last couple of days, to rise, to speak in favor of Bill 7, because it is all that I hear my constituents talking about, and it's time for us to move forward on the work, to stand up for British Columbians, to stand up for British Columbian businesses, to allow British Columbian businesses to feel secure, knowing that their government now has a pathway forward to fight these unprecedented threats, and to stand up for them and to do the work that they put us here. It's time for us to start doing that work, and it's time for us to move forward and start doing what British Columbians asked us to do, and that's what Bill 7 does. It gives us the pathway. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. The chair will recognize Prince George, North Cariboo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premiers and his ministers may believe that they can pass this legislation with minimal scrutiny. However, British Columbians will not be fooled. They deserve transparency, accountability, and respect. Shortly before this House resumed sitting, the Premier told the media, Mr. Speaker, not this House, that he was planning to withdraw the most troubling part of this profoundly misguided legislation. That said, even without Part 4, what remains in this bill is deeply troubling. Part 1 of this bill still allows for sweeping trade policy changes through orders in Council. This means that instead of robust debate in this chamber, instead of input from industry leaders, small businesses and workers, decisions can still be made with a stroke of a pen by government officials. British Columbians should not have to wake up one morning to find that major changes in trade regulations have been made overnight without their knowledge, without their input, and without their representatives having had the chance to scrutinize these changes. Mr. Speaker, this is not how democracy is supposed to function. A government that governs in secrecy, a government that sidesteps parliamentary oversight, a government that excludes the public from decision-making cannot be trusted to act in the best interests of its citizens. Trade policy affects everyone, whether it is small business owners who rely on stable regulations to plan their operations, workers whose industries are shaped by trade agreements, or consumers who will ultimately pay the price for poorly conceived policies. The effect is widespread. Decisions of this magnitude should never be made without proper legislative scrutiny. The consequences of rushed or unvetted trade policy changes can be severe. Consider the potential disruptions to supply chains, the risks of retaliatory tariffs from trading partners, the uncertainty that businesses face when government shifts policy without warning. Stability and predictability in trade policy are not mere luxuries. They are necessities for a living economy. Without stability and predictability, investment flees the jurisdiction, jobs are put at risk, and businesses struggle to compete in an increasingly globalized market. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, when decisions are made behind closed doors without transparent debate, it erodes public trust in government institutions. Democracy thrives when policies are subjected to rigorous scrutiny, when different perspectives are considered, when the public has confidence that their elected representatives are actively shaping the laws that govern them. This bill, as it stands, Mr. Speaker, undermines those principles by concentrating too much power in the hands of too few. The members on the other side like to quote one of my favourite speakers, Winston Churchill, and to paraphrase, this puts too much power too often, too soon in the hands of too few. It's not a good look. It's not good policy, and it's incredibly dangerous. If the government is confident in its trade policy decisions, it should have no fear of open debate. If these changes are truly in the best interest of British Columbians, then let them be examined, discussed, and refined through the legislative process. Anything less is a disservice to the people we are elected to represent. It is critical to recognize that trade policy does not operate in a vacuum. It has long-term ramifications for economic growth, economic development, and international relations. British Columbia has a proud history of trade and commerce, with industries ranging from forestry and agriculture to manufacturing and technology. It also depends on government to provide clear, well-considered policies, Mr. Speaker, and to undermine the stability and predictability with unilateral decision-making is not just irresponsible, it is dangerous. We need only look at the volatility of international markets to understand why careful policy-making is essential. Poorly executed trade decisions can lead to economic downturns, capital flight, and job loss. For instance, sudden changes to import and export regulations could make British Columbia a less attractive place for business investment, costing the province in both revenue and employment opportunities. Moreover, transparency in public policy is not just about protecting business. It is also about ensuring that British Columbians benefit from fair and competitive market conditions. Unilateral decisions run the risk of favoring some specific corporate interests while at the same time hurting local entrepreneurs. This, Mr. Speaker, is why legislative scrutiny is so important. If the government's goal is truly to strengthen British Columbia's economic standing, then it must demonstrate a commitment to accountability. That means engaging with experts, consulting industry stakeholders, and allowing for parliamentary debate. It means trusting in democratic institutions rather than circumventing them. Anything less is a failure of leadership and a betrayal of the public trust. This House exists for a reason, Mr. Speaker. It is here to give voice to the people we represent, to challenge policy where necessary, and to ensure that legislation is in the best interests of all British Columbians. Let us not set a precedent where major economic decisions are made in secrecy. The prosperity of our province depends upon it. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's turn our attention to another deceptive aspect of this bill, the so-called sunset clause. The government would have us believe that powers granted under Bill 7 are temporary, set to expire after 2 years, or 1 year, I believe one of the amendments that has yet to be considered might say. But upon closer examination, we see that this provision is anything but a safeguard. In reality, like many such provisions over history, it contains a loophole that allows this government to extend these powers indefinitely without returning to this House, Mr. Speaker, for approval. This is not a sunset clause. This is a blank check. It allows the government to operate under the guise of temporary authority while ensuring that these provisions remain in place for as long as the government wishes. British Columbians deserve better than such deception. If the government truly intended for these powers to be temporary, they would have included a firm expiration date, one that could only be extended through a full legislative review and public consultation. We must ask ourselves, if the government needs these powers for a legitimate purpose, Why are they so reluctant to submit them to proper oversight? And the answer, Mr. Speaker, I believe is clear. They do not want scrutiny. They do not want accountability. They want the ability to govern by decree without the inconvenience of having to justify their decisions to the people they serve, represented by the opposition. A true sunset clause ensures that extraordinary powers granted to the government are automatically revoked after a fixed period unless there is a transparent democratic process that determines otherwise. That, Mr. Speaker, is the very essence of responsible governance. Instead, this so-called sunset clause is nothing more than an illusion designed to placate the public and silence critics while leaving the door wide open for the government to continue wielding these powers indefinitely. We've seen this pattern before. Time and again, governments have introduced so-called temporary measures that in practice became permanent fixtures. This government must be hoping that the people of British Columbia will not notice this sleight of hand, that they will take their claims at face value. But we in this House have a duty to scrutinize, to challenge, and to expose these tactics for what they are: an attempt to consolidate power under the false pretense of necessity. Let me be absolutely clear. No government should have the ability to extend sweeping powers without the express approval of this legislature. To do so is to erode the very foundations of our democracy. It sets a dangerous precedent, one in which governments can bypass the will of the people under the thin guise of legal technicality. It is an affront to the principles of accountability and transparency that should guide all legislative action. Mr. Speaker, British Columbians should not have to tolerate this kind of deception. If the government truly believes that these powers are necessary, let them bring forward a case to this House when the 2-year period expires. Let them defend their position before the elected representatives of the people. Let them engage in open debate and subject their arguments to public scrutiny. That is how democracy works. But that is not what this government wants. It wants to avoid the inconvenience of parliamentary oversight. It wants to sidestep public input. And I worry that they may want to keep these powers indefinitely without having to answer for them. And that is not governing, Mr. Speaker, that is ruling. And in a democracy, Mr. Speaker, governments are meant to serve, not to rule. So I call upon this House to reject this misleading provision. Do not be fooled by the government's rhetoric, Mr. Speaker. We must demand that the government makes a firm commitment to temporary measures, not a backdoor for permanent overreach. If this government is unwilling to put in place real safeguards, then we must oppose this clause and indeed this bill in its entirety. British Columbians deserve nothing less than full transparency, real accountability, and a government that respects the democratic process. It is instructive, Mr. Speaker, that the government has already seen the necessity to walk back the odious section of this bill known as Part 4, whose purpose seemed simply to upend nearly all of the checks and balances enacted in British Columbia since Confederation in favour of some bizarre system of rule by decree run out of the Premier's office and enabled by a pliant and ineffectual Attorney General. The notion of granting the Premier, acting in the name of the Executive Council, total authority to override any act of the legislature, any ruling of a board or commission, any decision of a city or municipal council, seems on its surface so incredibly far-fetched that we probably would not have believed it to be possible, even for this government, to propose such a thing. And then, Mr. Speaker, we saw it with our own eyes. We read it in this bill. And not only did this government, did this Premier propose such a thing, they dared to even propose that it should apply retroactively. It's unbelievable. The retroactive application of Part 4 opened the possibility that British Columbians could have run afoul of the law, or some law, enacted by the Premier, by doing something that was legal at the time, but is no longer so, when the long arm of the Premier's decree reached back into the past. Another enduring feature of this legislation is that agents of the government are protected from prosecution or from civil liability for any harm that may ensue from the wrong-headed application of Bill 7. So let's consider that some potential harm, the harm that could and most likely will arise from the capricious and arbitrary exercise of the broad and sweeping power that this Premier and his government are handing themselves through this bill. We all remember the phrase, never let a good crisis go to waste. Those crises, like a tariff war, for example, could be used to political advantage, basically to do things that would never be acceptable in a democratic society in the normal course of events. And I can't wonder whether the Premier, who grew up, went to high school, went to university, learned his politics in southwestern Ontario, I can't wonder what he was taught in those schools. Was he watching hardball political operatives in history playing games? Was he looking at tools used by dictatorships? Was he reading Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals and trying to make its application solid? Before I move on to the remaining elements of Bill 7, I want to remind this House that in the time leading up to election last October, the election where the Premier was so strongly rebuked by the electorate, where so many of his members and ministers went down to defeat, and where his narrow election win was essentially mailed in to places like Surrey Guildford by non-residents. In that time, leading up to that nearly catastrophic election, Mr. Speaker, the Premier and his government were focused on housing. And when this government is focused on something, the playbook is all too familiar. Draconian measures, new taxes, new vacancy taxes, new speculation taxes, new prohibitions on short-term rentals, new prohibitions on elderly strata council volunteers maintaining their small buildings for the owners instead of allowing speculators to insert revenue properties and tenancies into their long-standing communities. Mr. Speaker, we saw the full extent of the Premier's genius applied to the housing crisis and the strong arm of the Premier and his housing minister and his housing minister's ever-expanding political staff and how they've been brought to bear. Millions upon millions of taxpayer dollars have been poured into purchasing aging, fully occupied, rent-controlled apartments from the owners and giving them to quasi-autonomous, notionally not-for-profit organizations staffed with activists politically supportive of the Premier and his government. What could go wrong, Mr. Speaker, when this NDP government turns its attention to an issue? Let's look at the Vancouver housing market, where the need for affordable housing has been most acutely felt. In January, Canada Mortgage and Housing reported that housing starts had plunged 37% year over year. That's since January of 2024, when the Premier and his government were very actively focused on housing. Moving forward into February, we saw more results of this government's attention to the housing file, as housing starts plunged 48%. That's new construction we're talking about. Let's look at the overall picture with home ownership.
Pardon me, member.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if we could get a clarity as to how this relates to Bill 7. Could we come back to Bill 7, please?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. It's the clarity that I'm attempting to show is a pattern within the government that allows this sort of thing to continue. But I do appreciate your guidance.
I thank you for that. I am certainly going to encourage all members to debate Bill 7, which is what we're here to hear about today. Thank you, Prince George,
I will go on to Bill 7 more.
North Caribou.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, with this primer on cause and effect in mind, and given that this Premier never likes to let a good crisis go to waste, let's consider what's left of Bill 7 and ask ourselves what this government could possibly have in mind. If this government is to be believed, Part 1 is devoted to promoting free trade between the provinces, and it gives the Premier extraordinary power to strike down regulations and barriers to trade with other provinces. I should note here that this is the party that went to extraordinary and ridiculous lengths and tremendous cost, losing every court decision in a futile attempt to block the construction of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. This is a Premier and a party that has been notorious for turning its back on other provinces, and now this is a Premier and a party which is seeking, through Part 1 of this bill, extraordinary powers to overturn any regulatory authority, any local municipal council, any independent licensing authority that would impede the free flow of trade in goods and services with other Canadian provinces. Forgive me, Mr. Speaker, but if this Premier can do for free trade with the provinces what he has done for housing construction and home affordability, I worry that the people of British Columbia might soon never again enjoy the taste of maple syrup, or lobster, or even the simple pleasures of salted cod fish. Perhaps the Premier will prove me wrong, but I worry for the future of trade with our neighbouring provinces once Bill 7 goes into effect. Part 2 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, gives the Premier and his government the power to override procurement rules and regulations for the greater good, and it indemnifies the Premier and his government and all those who do their bidding from any legal liability for any unanticipated bad outcomes of their decisions. The same people who have directed millions of dollars of taxpayer money to contracts with American technology suppliers are now giving themselves the power, we assume, to break all those contracts and without regard to the consequences. After all, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen, Mr. Speaker? Finally, Part 3 of this laughable piece of legislation, laughable I say with tongue-in-cheek because it's really not laughable at all, it's very serious and very scary. It gives the Premier broad and unchallengeable powers to level tolls, fees and charges on our highways, bridges and ferries. We are led to believe that this power is to be used against a handful of vehicles traveling from the southern 48 states through British Columbia over the Alaska Highway, thus possibly robbing small communities and rural areas of any kind of revenue that could be taken from tourism in those areas. This legislation also gives the Premier and his government the right to use automated surveillance on all vehicles in the province. Is that something we really want in our free society, Mr. Speaker? Now, pardon me, if this were the actual purpose of the legislation, if this is why this Premier is putting this crisis to such use, we would have presented a bill to invade the privacy and levy tolls on American vehicles, presumably American 18 or 24-wheel heavy trucks transporting goods to Alaska. But let's face it, at the first sign of the Premier obstructing the supply of essentials to the good people of Alaska, our neighbours, the United States of America would activate its considerable logistical arsenal, heavy cargo transports, helicopters, shipping vessels, and what have you, to supply the needs of their embattled countrymen. Does anyone remember the Marshall Plan? The Americans drove a very successful effort. The members on the other side of the House like to use allusions from World War II and historical times. Well, there's one for you. That shows that the Americans are very good at getting around such problems. And I can assure you they would make use of this sort of a technique to do the same here. Part 3 of the bill doesn't actually mention Americans at all. The power to tax, toll, and enact surveillance applies to every vehicle in British Columbia, whether it's the Tesla of one of the Premier's latte-sipping constituents on West 4th, the Ford 150 or Chevy Silverado of one of my constituents in Prince George, North Caribou, or any others in the province. It's very, very clear that it would apply to everyone. So, sir, the powers of Bill 7 are so broad, the Premier could charge a senior citizen 50 cents for driving their motorized scooter onto Granville Island, and he could place a tracking device on that scooter should he so choose to make sure that Granny pays up. The Premier can also, thanks to Bill 7, place a lien on that scooter and enforce the collection of that 50 cents as a debt to the Crown in right of British Columbia. He's not messing around, Granny. And it won't be 50 cents. Mr. Speaker, I could carry on for the remainder of this sitting, explaining the enormous overreach and the extraordinary powers that the pliant flock of sheep on the benches opposite are willing to grant to this Premier. And I could mention how countless Premiers in Canadian history in near minority positions similar to this Premier would be absolutely green with envy to find themselves with such a gullible and accommodating third party as our friends in the House to make the passage of Bill 7 possible. That said, I invite my colleagues to take up the torch, carry on the battle against this truly egregious piece of legislation, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I take my seat.
Thank you very much, member. Seeing no further speakers, I beg your pardon?
Close debate.
Seeing no further speakers, the question before the House is second reading of Bill 7. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
The ayes have it. Division has been called.
Members, the question is second reading of Bill 7. All those in favor, please rise or indicate. Thank you. Be seated. Those who oppose, please rise or indicate. Thank you. Be seated. And Madam Clerk will now take vote from members participating virtually. Please make sure your audio is on.
Emily Giddens.
I vote nay.
Emily Hepner.
Please unmute yourself, member.
I vote nay.
Minister Lohr.
I vote aye.
Emily Rochford.
I vote aye.
Emily Stamer.
I vote nay.
Emily Tepper.
Vote nay.
Emily Watt.
I vote nay.
Those voting aye: Lohr, Anderson, Blatherwick, Elmore, Sunner, Toporowski, B. Anderson, Neal, Osborne, Brar, Davidson, Callon, Parmar, Gibson, Bair, Chandra Herbert, Wickens, Kang, Morissette, Sandu, Krieger, Chant, La Jeunesse, Choi, Rochford, Higginson, Rutledge, Popham, Dix, Sharma, Farnworth, E.B. Bailey, Begg, Green, Whiteside, Boyle, Ma, Young, Malcolmson, Chow, Glumac, Aurora, Shaw, Philip, Deere, Valeriette, and Botterill, 48. Those voting nay: Sturko, Kindy, Millibar, Warbus, Banman, Watt, Cooner, Halford, Hartwell, Neufeld, Van Popta, Dew, Gasper, Neufeld, Day, Block, Bangu, Payton, Boltby, Chan, Tour, Hepner, Giddens, Rattay, Davis, McGinnis, Bird, Lux, Stamer, Moz, Tepper, Mock, Wilson, Clare, Williams, Lowen, Dollywall, Dirksen, Chapman, McCall, Keeley, Armstrong, Brody, 43.
Motion carried. Attorney General. Attorney General.
I move that the bill be committed to a committee of the whole to be considered the next sitting of the House after today.
You have heard the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of Supply, Section A, reports progress on the estimates of the Ministry of Citizen Services and asks leaves to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again? Government House Leader.
Next sitting.
So ordered. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I move the House now adjourn.
Member, you heard the question to adjourn the House. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1 p.m. today.